These videos are not for children. If you are a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso. And I've already talked about family matters a couple times on this channel. And I'm pretty sure in most of my videos on the subject, the character Myra Monkhouse came up once or twice. But my number one reason for hating Urkel, I'm not even playing here. My number one reason for harboring an intense hatred of Urkel after all these years, the very reason I stopped watching the show as a kid, and that's that he traded in Myra for Laura. And all these years later, I'm gonna be real with you, I'm still a little salty about that. But I've only talked about her situation with the show in passing. As I previously mentioned in another video, Urkel was a late addition to the first season of Family Matters. What was supposed to be a one-episode deal became a reoccurring role. And that reoccurring role then became an opening credit. Urkel didn't just become a member of the main cast. Urkel became the show itself, with everyone who came before him taking a back seat to his rise to power. Behind the scenes, it was some real Scarface type shit going on. Since Steve Urkel's very first appearance on the show, he was written to have a huge crush that bordered more on the lines of an obsession with the Winslow daughter, Laura. And episode after episode, year after year, time after time, she would turn him down. Continually. Yet Steve, for as smart as he was, somehow didn't take the hint. And he continued to pursue Laura over the course of the next couple years.
But I thought you'd
What I like is for you to leave me alone.
I know I'm not worthy of you, but I just can't help loving you. It's like wanting to touch a star. You know you'll never reach it, but you've just got to keep trying.
As Urkel became the star of the show, much more focus was put on his love for Laura, which makes sense as that seemed to be Steve's sole motivation in life. Well, that and also trying to give Carl Winslow a stroke. Eventually, Laura gets fed up with Urkel's pursuit of her. And so does her boyfriend at the time, too. Halfway through season 4, the two scheme to try and find a permanent solution to their Urkel problem. Laura sets Urkel up with her boyfriend's cousin, Myra. The two hit it off immediately and bond over their similar nerdy interests and seemingly identical IQs. I have to give Michelle Thomas credit here. She was tasked with being the love interest to one of the most famous TV show characters in history. But to her credit, she was up for the task. She arrived prepared, as her energy instantly matched his. They clicked and their relationship, well, it just made a whole lot of sense. Well, I mean, outside of why Myra would be interested in someone like Steve, especially when Steve was still somewhat interested in her cousin's girlfriend, but nonetheless, outside of that, it made plenty of sense. The couple worked, and they were easily my favorite relationship on the show, right behind Carl and Harriet. Much like Steve Urkel's arrival to Family Matters, Myra also shook things up. Which is good, because let's be honest, this could have very easily been a 3J situation. Adding characters late into a series doesn't always work. For every Castiel, there's like 3 Cousin Olivers. Thankfully, Myra was no 7. Her entrance into the show was an impactful and welcome one, giving Steve a much healthier love interest, because she was actually interested in him, and giving the show a new dynamic to play with. Like Steve's love for Laura, Myra's love for Steve also became an unhealthy obsession, though it is a little bit different because Steve was still willingly a part of it. You know, it's not great behavior, but he was the one enabling it, so you could point your finger at either one and you're right both times. Myra loved Steve. She supported him in all that he did, remained by his side through his failures and his flaws, and for 4 to 5 seasons, she was everything you could possibly want in a partner. So of course Steve dumps her the second he has so much as a little bit, a sniff at a chance with Laura. And this right here is where I stopped watching the show. No joke. I dead-ass stopped watching the show altogether as a kid as soon as this happened. I always thought things got too goofy for my taste, even back then. But I kept watching because I liked the characters. Carl and Harriet had great banter. Steve and Myra's adventures were always entertaining. Eddie had the best lines in all of the show. And Waldo could give Jazz a run for his dumb money. All of that's what kept me watching. But breaking Myra and Urkel up? That was my breaking point. That was it. I was done. For a long while, Myra was actually my favorite character on the show. Her strange relationship with Steve and Laura drove a lot of the more fun plots in later seasons. Her performance was perfect and was the reason I tuned in. She could be cute, she could be compassionate, she could be crazy. And all of it still managed to feel natural for her character. Michelle Thomas balanced all those aspects out perfectly, and I appreciate that. Plus, you know, when I was younger, I may or may not have had a little bit of a crush on her. Yeah, it was at that point in my life I realized I was into crazy chicks. And I have never outgrown that, unfortunately. Yeah, so I had a thing for Myra. Who didn't? But you know, I'm sure that didn't affect my judgment. The same way Ginger Spice was my favorite Spice Girl because I really liked her music. Yep. Hers, specifically. Her. Only her. Amazing musician. She was the Beatles of her time. But in all seriousness, Michelle Thomas was an extremely talented woman. And her contributions on the show kept me invested then and even more so now. I enjoy her comedic stylings. I don't think that just anybody could pull this role off the way that she did. It's a real shame that those talents were for the most part only recognized here. But a lot of time, talent goes completely unrecognized, so at least we have this. And from my experience, untalent never goes unrecognized. People love to point that out, especially if you have a comment section. Secondly, I never in all of my days wanted to see Steve actually make it with Laura.
I didn't ask for this.
It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me as a child, and it makes even less sense to me now watching this as a man-child. Now don't get me wrong, I understand that Steve and Laura was probably going to be the end goal of the show. As soon as the audience decided Urkel should be kept around, that's probably when a concept for this came up. I get that that was a starting point. But the thing is, things change. Sometimes shows outgrow certain plots, people, and pairings. Look at How I Met Your Mother. Robin and Ted were the end goal of that show. But by the time the show got to its end, people were kind of hoping for a different achievement. Robin and Ted's romantic chemistry seemed to dissipate. Their friendship was beyond evident, and having Ted come to the realization that he was in love with Robin in the show's last season felt really unnatural. Fans wanted to see Robin and Barney become an old married couple. They wanted to see more of Ted's relationship with the mother. This is like the exact opposite of the problem I have with Smallville. But you know what? We'll get into that another time. My point is, I think that Family Matters ran into a similar issue. Steve always pined for Laura, sure, but Laura at no point in time seemed to reciprocate that at all. The two shared chemistry as performers, but I don't think these two characters specifically had any romantic chemistry. At no point in time do they seem like a legitimate couple. They seem like a sentient plot convenience. I could appreciate it if Steve and Laura's romance was maybe built to, but it really wasn't. It was always shown to be one-sided until one day, randomly, almost a decade into its run, it wasn't.
You actually like Steve Urkel? I'm starting to.
I mean, practically overnight, Laura decides that she likes Steve, and his successful long-term relationship with Myra is cut off, and we're rushed into an unwanted Steve and Laura pairing. And with the way that the show set it up, I'm sure it was unintentional with those in charge, but the timing of it is all really suspect. And it does much more to cast a negative light on Laura's character. After knowing him and rejecting his advances for years, Laura only seemingly randomly becomes attracted to Steve after he becomes successful. When he was some pencil-neck geek back in high school and middle school, Laura didn't give the guy the time of day. But now the man has a job with NASA, she's looking to put a ring on it. I don't know, it just seems all kind of convenient. I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me. Don't trust it. I don't like it. I don't like any part of that shit. When Steve and Laura finally do get together, it felt like they were missing a certain spark. No matter how much the show wanted to insist that these two were head over heels for each other, it just never came off as legitimate to me. The two were not making a love connection. It was not there. If that wasn't bad enough on its own, mind you that this relationship began the day the last one ended.
No!
Meaning the writers had to reprogram their audience into thinking, no, Laura isn't disgusted by Steve's mere existence. she's madly in love with him.
Ooh, I love that snort. What?
You had 8 seasons of Laura being annoyed by Steve. 8 years. People grew up in the course of that time. The actors in the show included. And now, just as we're getting close to the finale, you're gonna tell me that those feelings have morphed into a mutual affection somehow? What kind of late-in-the-game Stockholm Syndrome bullshit is this? Now, in addition to trying to gaslight your audience into thinking Laura actually was feeling Steve, you also needed to try and convince them that they were somehow more compatible than Steve and Myra. Myra, who was basically written to be a female Steve Urkel. No, not like that. Not that one. Come on, get that shit out of here. I don't want to remember that performance. Myra and Steve had everything in common. Everything except for Steve's love for Laura. The two worked well together and seemed practically inseparable. So separating them in the show's final season, to me, just kinda seems like a mistake. Logically, Myra was the better fit for him. And ending the show like that probably would have been more satisfying for, well, for all characters, actually. I do understand the show wanting to recapture interest by doing something unexpected in their last season. You know, for almost a decade, audiences thought they'd never see the day Laura and Steve got together. This would be like Rachel giving in to Gunther's clearly irresistible charm. My issue with it is that I think this shocking twist kind of came at the expense of several other happy endings. Let Laura have Stefan, keep Myra with Steve, and send 3J somewhere else, anywhere else, just away from my TV screen. Bring him back when he's ready to finally star in Max Cable's big move. Until then, I don't want to see him. It's not like Myra was some minor character. She was a main character. She was in the opening credits. The fact that Myra was so easily written off and discarded is kind of sad. We don't ever really get closure for the character. Even when we see her in the series finale, she's still clearly not over Steve, despite the fact that he's ready to walk down the aisle with someone else. That's a pretty sad ending for a character who is only guilty of not being Laura. But it's amazing what changes when you view something old with a new set of eyes. And after having put together this video and relived some of Myra and Steve's most famous and infamous moments, I still do think that Myra was better for Steve than Laura was. But now, I also think that maybe Myra was better off alone than being with Steve. Because for as compatible as the two were, at best, Myra was always Steve's second choice. Steve always, even throughout their entire relationship, put Laura as his #1 priority. When Laura was feeling lonely, despite Steve being Myra's boyfriend, Steve was ready to hop back into his transformation chamber and bring back Stefan, leaving Myra alone forever, I guess? As a matter of fact, when they were going out, Steve straight up told Myra that he was in love with Laura. That's while they were together. Looking back at it, the show sort of treated Myra like she was Steve's consolation prize. And I think that is a tragic misuse of a pretty great character. In the previous videos I made, I used the hashtags Justice for Myra, and Myra deserved better. But it wasn't until I started making this video that I realized just how true that statement is. I used to think that Myra deserved Steve, but now I'm thinking that she probably deserved someone better than Steve. You know, like someone who actually wanted to be with her. But regardless of how you feel on that situation, I think that we can all collectively agree Urkel fucked up. You had one choice to make and you chose wrong. You had a 50-50 shot of getting it right, but you 100% failed. And what's even worse is, I don't know how much different this could have been. Michelle Thomas, who played Myra, was sick at the time. And by the time the last season of the show came, she was in so much pain that her time on set had to be severely limited. She sadly would pass away 5 months after the final episode of the show was aired. So in lieu of my usual closing, as always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time, same bat channel.